This is not the video I was planning to release today. If you didn't hear, Stronghold Warlords has been delayed for a second and what looks like final time. It's now due to release on March 9th. That was the video I had scheduled in my calendar for today. But sometimes things go wrong. Games get delayed, plans change. So instead of looking at the newest game in the now 20-year-old series, we're going to go back and take a look at one of the oldest. Stronghold Crusader was released in 2002, and like the original, it was created by UK-based developer Firefly Studios. It stands as a sort of sequel, sort of spin-off to its predecessor, as it basically took that game's formula, mixed it up in a bowl with a few extra ingredients, mainly sand, and presented itself as a new title. That's not to say it isn't unique. Crusader definitely brought a lot of new and meaningful additions to the roundtable to set itself apart from the original. But it's not hard to see the clear similarities between them either, and dissuade the possible notion that Stronghold Crusader might not be anything more than a re-release of its older brother in a new box with a new paint job. So is that the case, or is there more to it? Is Stronghold Crusader worth playing in 2021? Should you just stick to the original? All these questions and more are about to be answered. But first, a message from our sponsor. A few videos ago, I received this comment. Not a fan of ads, but happy to see there's no Raid Shadow Legends at least. And I replied, come on bro, what do you have against Raid Shadow Legends, one of the top mobile RPGs with over 10 million downloads and a nearly 5-star rating on the App Store? You'd be silly not to use my link in the description to download Raid yourself on your mobile device or personal computer. There are bosses, intense 3D graphics, and hundreds of champions from 13 distinct factions. Currently I've got my boy Kale as my main damage dealer. He's the best starter by far, and to be frank it's not even close. Acid Rain makes replaying and clearing earlier campaigns a breeze. And a new addition I have to my team is Valerie. You can farm her from the first campaign and she's a solid addition to any burgeoning squad thanks to her effective support abilities. Look, like many of you I'm sure, I have a use case for playing mobile games. For me it's when I'm waiting at the airport before a flight, or lying back on a seat while doing my monthly blood donation. And Raid is perfect for that. Raid is constantly being updated. Last month saw its biggest one yet. Front and centre was the Doom Tower, holding 120 floors, challenge rooms, and 12 bosses to pulverise or be pulverised by. If you want to get a head start in Raid, then hit the link below. If you're a new player, you'll receive a free Void Champion Bulwark, 50 gems, an XP booster, some energy refills, and an Ancient Shard as soon as you get in the game. And you can get all that gear from the front page. Just tap here. So get in there, and thanks for Raid for sponsoring this video. The most obvious change Crusader presents over its predecessor is the setting. No longer are you based in the flowing grasslands of England. Instead, it's the sandy deserts of the Middle East that you'll be calling home. Rivers have been replaced by pristine oases, and trees have been replaced by the trees are still there, but they do look a little different. The game takes place during the Crusades, as you could probably guess, and as such features a slew of new characters, units, and buildings appropriate to the setting. Thankfully, almost everything from the original Stronghold has made the move over to Crusader as well, so variety-wise it's an objective upgrade. Some things have taken a slightly different form, however, as the original looks would have looked quite out of place in a desert setting. Don't be fooled though. Even though things like houses, stone, knights, swordsmen, and your lord are visually distinct, they are functionally identical. It's the brand new things that Crusader offers that are the most interesting. Buildings, units, characters, mechanics, etc. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's start at the beginning. Stronghold Crusader is of course through and through a castle building sim first, and the core tenets of the original remain in its successor. You begin with a keep, a lord, and some peasants. And it's up to you to grow and develop it by your preferred means. Whether that's by ruling with an iron fist and keeping your peasants on a tight leash, or being a benevolent lord who gives
double rations, great!
Even if that is just an excuse to tax the daylights out of them while leaving a smile on their face. In typical Stronghold fashion, development is almost entirely based around a happiness system that affects how peasants come to your castle. If your happiness rating is at 50 or above, peasants will constantly flow in to work and attend jobs that need doing, thus gaining you resources and providing a means of increasing the gold in your keep. You obviously then use the variety of resources to build more buildings, strengthen your defences, train troops, etc, etc. You'll gain peasants at a constant rate until your population cap is full, which is increased by building houses. But every person is another mouth to feed, so too many will result in bad things. On the contrary to that, if your happiness rating is lower than 50, then people will start leaving for greener pastures, which means jobs will be left unfulfilled, supplies won't be gathered, income will dwindle, and things won't get better until you start making life in your castle more bearable. This is done in a multitude of ways, such as lowering taxes, increasing rations, providing religion, ale, as well as others. So it's a balancing act. Like I said earlier, give double rations, then tax them into the ground. Perfectly balanced. Peasants function autonomously, so you don't have to give any direct control on their roles, movements, and actions. They'll perform their tasks and go about their day without interference, which leaves you to focus on making sure you have all the resources required to expand, provide for, and defend your castle. That last part is important, as one of the key differences to Crusader over the original is a renewed focus on action, both on the amount of it and the speed at which it can occur. You see, in the original Stronghold, you couldn't really rush your opponent in the early game. I mean, sure, you could direct your economy into creating weapons and training soldiers, but because every archer needs gold to be trained, as well as a bow, and every bow needs wood, a workshop, armory, and craftsmen to create it, building a force quickly and substantial enough to significantly threaten your opponent required quite a thoughtful approach. The fastest way was likely to build a market and trade resources to get what you needed. But if your attack failed, you're suddenly left with no troops, money, and an economy that's likely a fraction of the size of your opponent's. And attacking early was still especially difficult because of the presence of the enemy lord, a combat powerhouse who could cut down a handful of early game troops without really breaking a sweat. Things changed in Crusader with the addition of mercenaries. Soldiers who could be trained basically instantly through a dedicated building. If you have the peasants and the money to hire them, a substantial force could now be yours very, very quickly, and for a lot less money than in the original, where if you wanted to go this route, you'd need to buy the required weapons and armour as well. Granted, these troops aren't as strong as their castle-built counterparts, but with the addition of new units and the ability to essentially prop up the military of your castle with just two resources, gold and peasants, fast and decisive combat becomes the key pillar of Crusader. Playing slow and defensively is certainly possible, and sometimes it's preferable, but there's more to worry about in the early game due to the new strategies offered by these specific mercenaries. Mainly the fire slaves. These guys are cheap, quick, and absolutely devastating if they can get within torching distance of your buildings. Fire is as dangerous as ever, and if you're not careful, a small handful of them can gut entire sections of your castle within seconds. It's exacerbated by the fact that farms can only be built on grass, and since the maps here are predominantly desert, you're limited to building them on sparse oases, which are almost always going to be outside your castle walls. The limited number of them obviously means space is precious, and considering how important farms are to your economy, fighting for the greenery to plant them on can get vicious. And that's not a bad thing, by the way, it's just how the game is positioned. Some of you will prefer it, while others won't. It's certainly a testament to Firefly's handling of development of the game. With just a couple of mechanical changes and additions, playing Crusader feels quite different from the original, despite having about 90% of the same DNA. Even with all that said about fast action and quicker gameplay, Crusader is still a castle sim at the end of the day, and at times you'll no doubt find yourself in the midst of a pitched battle. Siege equipment obviously returns, and you'll need it to break down your enemy's walls and gates in order to flood your troops through. The siege formula remains mostly unchanged from the original game. A couple of new things have been added, like a tall, thin tower for archers, and a ninja unit that can unlock gates from the inside, among others. And defending remains exciting by the return of siege defences like pitch ditches, spike traps, and caged war dogs. It's gloriously brutal, and it remains one of my favourite parts of the series. Funnily enough, the best addition to Crusader isn't a game mechanic at all, it's actually a game mode. Yes, this is the first game in the series to feature a skirmish mode, something that was sorely missing from the original. It features up to 8 players and is a bunch of AI lords to choose from to fight against or alongside, some of which return from the original and other entirely new ones for the series. You can do teams, change game settings, have a mix of both AI and human players over Steam multiplayer. It's great, everything you'd expect from a good skirmish mode and a much appreciated addition from the original. Playing multiplayer has led to some epic games where me and my mate can flex our Crusader muscles. and take on 6 AI opponents on the hardest difficulty with a handicap on ourselves to boot. How would PvP go? Maybe not this well. Just let us have this, okay? Aside from skirmish, Crusader of course brings other ways to play too, though the offering feels a bit lacking in some cases. Free play returns, but seems somewhat moot due to the action-focused nature of the game, along with the constrained economic gameplay imposed by the limited build space. I'd much rather just build my aesthetically impeccable dream castle in the original game, rather than micromanage every square meter of space in Crusader to try and get as many farms as possible. Crusader trails, however, are entirely new. There's 2 paths to complete with a total of 80 missions. They're fun, and are essentially increasingly difficult predetermined skirmish matches against unique combinations of opponents with specific starting conditions. There's no story component, but that's not really the point here. They're exciting, varied, and completing them all is a challenge indeed. Something I am sad to see missing though are the siege and invasion missions from the original game, though you can create your own in the scenario editor or just download the myriad of custom ones available on Stronghold Heaven. Lastly, there's a handful of smaller narrative campaigns which replace the single long-form one from the original, so let's quickly talk about those now. Presentation-wise, these campaigns are nothing special. There's no cutscenes besides the Age of Empires 2 style book readings, and while they are voice acted competently and set the scene well enough, calling them engaging would be a stretch. Each campaign contains 5 missions, some of which are built around some pretty creative scenarios. Thankfully, there's not too many boring skirmish matches. Some will give you limited resources or a set number of troops that you need to use effectively in order to be victorious. They're almost like puzzles in a weird kind of way, and I actually quite enjoy them. I'll admit I personally do miss the presence of a proper narrative throughline like the original, but hey, it's something. All summed up, Stronghold and Stronghold Crusader offer different experiences when it comes to the single player content. There's some overlap of course, but with the original giving a more narrative focused story and Crusader having more standalone puzzle-like missions, I'd say there's certainly room for both if you're deciding which one to play. The graphical style of Crusader is as charming as ever, and obviously shares many similarities with its European set counterpart. A lot of the assets have been reused, with only some of them seeing changes to fit into the desert setting. But even with just a few changes and some colour swaps, everything slots right in nicely. Castles look right at home with stone seeing a palette swap, and I really can't fault the devs for not altering more, as everything on the whole just looks so good already. With all the original assets being as iconic as they are, you might think that adding a bunch of Arabian-themed units to the mix would leave them feeling out of place. Thankfully, that's not the case, and if you sat someone down with Crusader, I'd bet they'd have a hard time picking which assets were added for this game and which were reused. The art team at Firefly was absolutely on point here, and like its predecessor, the art style and asset quality remain as timeless as ever. If you're like me, then you'll agree that the original Stronghold has a truly excellent soundtrack. It fits the game's themes incredibly well. The stretches of downtime and economic development, the music is relaxing, charming, and full of life. But when the enemy is at the gates, slamming through your walls and terrorizing your populace, it's foreboding and dramatic. It's one of my favourite RTS original soundtracks of all time, and while I personally don't think Crusader quite lives up to its predecessor's lofty standards, it gets darn close. I don't think it's quite as memorable, but it nails some key things that make it just as effective. Unlike many RTSs of the time that simply run through a playlist of tracks no matter what's going on, Crusader matches the theme and tone of what's happening on screen. It's simply more dynamic than the alternative, and it helps to set the scene and add emotion to what's unfolding in front of you. Not every track is new, there is some overlap from the original game, but I don't see that as a bad thing. The music of Stronghold had soul, and Crusader is no different. Crusader received 2 further releases after its initial outing. The first was Crusader Extreme, which hit shelves in 2008, bringing a new Crusader trail plus changes to population limits which allowed up to 10,000 units to exist at any one time, Crusader Extreme was not very well received, mainly because of its extreme difficulty and lack of any substantial changes or upgrades to the original. Crusader HD, on the other hand, which you've been seeing and hearing about throughout this video, was different. Released in 2014 alongside Stronghold HD, the re-release brought all the content from the original, and with Extreme, and bundled it together in one pack. It also brought modern system support and increased resolution options. That last one is a bit of a misnomer though, as all assets seem to retain their original sizes but can now just scale higher. So by increasing your resolution, you're also effectively making everything smaller on your screen, to the point where playing it at higher than 1080p is kind of ridiculous. My monitor is 1440p, but I play at 1080 because of how tiny everything is otherwise. So that's one issue with HD. Another one is its lack of Steam multiplayer support, which is sorely lacking. To be fair, it does prompt you to install Game Ranger the first time you boot, but I'd rather just have it be integrated through Steamworks. There's no real mod community either, and I'm not sure if that's done due to the tools just not being available, or people just not itching to change the core game. There's only a few that are decently popular, such as Stronghold Europe and GMB mod, but they don't make any significant gameplay alterations, so don't expect anything extensive in that department. If you want to expand your map or scenario section, you can download more online, though unfortunately there's no Steam Workshop support. Thankfully, there are a ton of super cool examples and they're really simple to install. Just go and check them out on Stronghold Heaven if you're interested. In 2001, Firefly struck lightning in a bottle with the original Stronghold. An excellent castle builder and RTS that had real soul, charm and character. And to be frank, it's something they've never been able to recreate to the same degree since. Something I'm really hoping will change with Warlords. But the closest they got was absolutely with Crusader. Of course in no small part due to that 90% of it is basically the same game. But with a few changes they were able to make it unique, and thanks to that Crusader stands not as a replacement for the original, but more like an alternate take on the same formula. Crusader is far more action focused than its predecessor, but holds on to the addictive castle sim gameplay that made people love the original so much. And it's because of that that a lot of people certainly regard Crusader as the better game, and by extension the best in the series. And I know I'm going against the grain here, but I'm actually not one of those people. The original holds such a strong place in my heart thanks to its immense levels of charm and wit, with fine details you wouldn't expect, and gameplay that is still unique to this day. And to put aside the fancy reviewer talk for a second, it's just fucking cozy, man. Having that iconic music in your ear as you build your dream castle without any dramas or stresses is really peak gaming in my opinion. But back to Crusader. It takes that idea and says, no, this is no time to relax, it's time to fight. And fight it does. Crusader is still a great time in 2021, and it's sure to satiate your desire for an action-focused castle builder. A niche genre to be sure, but one that can provide hours of enjoyment all the same. Let's hope Warlords can deliver on all its promises. Seeing a Stronghold game truly live up to the originals would be something I would love to see. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to the channel. And hit the bell too, you'll be notified of my Stronghold Warlords review as soon as it goes live on or before the game's official release. Also, if you're in the neighbourhood, subscribe to the second channel too. I've got some interesting content planned for this year, that's for sure. And if you really like what I do here, please consider supporting me via YouTube memberships like these magnificent people on screen here. It truly means a lot that you choose to do so, and I really appreciate it. If you'd like to follow me for updates on the channel and future videos, then you can do so on Twitter. Anyways, thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.